If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity.
To the enterprise. Welcome back to the Enterprise Security Weekly, and we're going to do the enterprise news. I'm Doug White, filling in for Adrian. It's episode 342 on the 7th of December. Is Riker's beard infected with space impetigo? Find out at 11. I mean, they told me I was doing enterprise news, so I thought, I had to make an enterprise joke, and I couldn't decide. Was it NCC 1701 or NCC 1701D? I don't know. Adrian told me it wasn't that kind of enterprise, but one can dream, right? I mean, did Kirk have a tagline? Was there something? I mean, he didn't really have a tagline, but like Riker was telling Betazoid jokes or what? Oh, okay, no more Star Trek jokes. I'm going to stop.
He didn't have a tagline. No.
He
Picard
really
did. Make it so.
Yeah, and engage.
Engage, exactly.
Yeah, Picard started that whole. The captain has to have a special thing, they say, and Kirk was always just like, I don't know, hand me a beer, kind of thing. But and
YOLO it.
Yeah.
Well, that was Kirk's approach anyway. It was YOLO. Is just go ahead and. I think the whole dynamic between Kirk and Spock was ego-id type dynamic.
Absolutely.
And then in Next Gen, they kind of split that out a little further, which spread it out among Picard and Riker and Worf and Data and made it interesting. And I think a lot of the other big sci-fi shows kind of built and expanded on that with like Stargate SG-1 and others.
It made a lot more sense too, right? Instead of the entire bridge crew going down to the planet that's like, about to, kill everybody. It's like Kirk's like, yeah, Spock, Bones, Sulu, hey, Chekhov, I don't know, everybody get on.
And Yeoman Johnson. Yeah,
we'll take everybody. And then, some rando crewman sits down in the command chair. And I'm like, this is going to be bad if you guys all get like dead down there. But like on Next Gen, it was like, the captain kind of stayed on the ship and they sent Riker because, he was expendable. It's like,
he was also younger.
Yeah. I mean, it made a lot of sense.
That.
Yeah,
I've done my Kirk YOLO stuff. I'm done.
Okay.
I'm good. I need to go to another planet.
I had that note that said, be sure and do. Yeah, okay. But, speaking of be sure and follow us on LinkedIn for our updates across our organization, show highlights, and more. You can always find us by searching for Security Weekly Productions or go to securityweekly.com. So be sure and check out securityweekly.com/ESW342, where we do have all the show notes for the stories. If you want to follow along as we go through these news stories and or links to the articles we're covering so you can read them and yell at the screen a lot or shake your fist at clouds or whatever you need to do, all that is possible and more. So, yeah. So, we got Katie and Sean back with this second segment, and it's lots of fun. Hi, everybody. Welcome aboard again. Seems like I just saw you.
You did.
I know. I'm not used to these 2-segment shows, so I was like, I just have my thing, and we quit, and I go home.
It's usually 3, so I think Adrian was being nice where you just have 2 today.
Yeah, that was right. They told me that there was normally going to be like 3 whole segments, so we only have 2 whole segments. But they extended the time on them. I don't know. It didn't matter. I don't read the instructions. I just show up and start ranting.
Just try to create the robot from the Transformer thing, right?
Yeah, that kind of thing. And plus, they got free drinks here, so it's like whatever. The show could last for 6 hours. It doesn't matter, and as long as the bar is open. They don't have a bartender anymore. They used to have a bartender at Paul's Security Weekly, which was pretty nice. Oh, wow. Yeah, except for when the show was over, and I was like, "Hello, could you come pick me up again?" Kind of stuff. So I don't confess to any crimes here. The story we were talking about before the show, which I think, and it came up in the previous segment as well, was this thing about 23andMe. So this week, 23andMe, if you're not familiar with it, is a company that has you spit in a tube and you spit in the tube, and then they analyze your DNA and they put it in this like ancestry database. And there's a lot of other companies doing this. But 23andMe got breached. And initially they said, oh, it's not a big deal. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh no, it might be a big deal. And then it was like, oh no, it is a big deal. And then it was like, oh yeah, everybody's data was lost. So the whole thing. And this was something, when I first saw these things, I think my dad bought me one of those kits or something. I was like, you should do this. And I was like, no, you should do this. But when it first came out, I was really nervous about it because I was immediately thinking about data breach. it's bad enough when OPM or OMB or one of those agencies loses all your top secret records, but when somebody actually loses your genome, and not just your genome, everybody you've ever known, or everybody you're related to's genome, the fact that that Swedish milkman that came around all the time somehow apparently got in my family tree somehow. I mean, I was like, wait, none of these people were Swedish. Where did this come from? And my mother was like, oh, there was a Swedish milkman. I was like, okay, that's it. No, I don't want to hear any more about it. That's it. We don't need to know any more about our ancestors than that. But so I don't know. What do you think about that? It's pretty terrifying.
It is pretty terrifying. The Wired article that I have in front of me says that on Friday they filed their SEC filing like they're supposed to, saying the threat actor was able to access a very small percentage of user accounts, or roughly 14,000. They said 0.1% or 14,000 of the 14 million customers that they have. But then on Monday they actually said, well, really it was the personal data of 5.5 million people who had opted into DNA relatives, as well as information from an additional 1.5 million DNA relative users who had their family tree profile information accessed. And then they also said that of this group of 5.5 million people, they stole display names, most recent login, relationship labels, predicted relationships, percentage of DNA shared with DNA relative matches. And in some other cases, as part of the DNA or the data compromise, included ancestry reports, details about where on their chromosomes they and their relatives had matching DNA, self-reported locations, so where they are, ancestor birth locations, family names, profile pictures, birth years, links to self-created family trees, and other profile information. And from what I was reading on Twitter last night, full genetic DNA information was accessible by the person who was logging in with their account in order to download their DNA account, their information about it. So this was, from what I can see, was what is related to a technique referred to as credential stuffing to compromise these 14,000 user accounts, where leaked logon credentials from other services were reused here, and apparently other similar services like Ancestry and MyHeritage are requiring two-factor authentication. 23andMe is as well now. And just to start the conversation and set kind of a baseline, there are people out there that go, why would anyone ever want to provide their DNA to a third-party company? Well, there are folks that are adopted that want to figure out where their parents are. There are people that have lost track of family members and want to have a good understanding of who they are, where they are. There are folks that don't really have good information about their family and where they come from and want to have kind of that peace of knowledge and peace of mind. So there are some really good reasons why people would do that.
No, and it's great for ancestry. I mean, my dad was real into this, like, family heritage thing, and he was always trying to figure stuff out, and he sort of hit all these dead ends. And then he was going to do this, and all of a sudden it's like pointing out all these people that are in this system. And I know Katie wants to talk about this, so I'm just going to bring it up. But, one of the creepy things I noticed was I was listed in not in 23andMe, but I was listed in I think it was Ancestry.com, but my dad put it in there. And I got contacted by a person in another state who said, my genetic information links me, to your family. Could we talk? And I was like, hell no. But I was like, I'm sorry, no. But Katie, I know you want to talk about that.
This sounds like a sophisticated social engineering attack. No,
I was like, no, that's not me.
Well, I actually have a friend whose husband, before he was a husband, was contacted by somebody who was actually his daughter, and he didn't know about that, and she was, so that does happen. Not saying yours was also legit, but getting back to the story. So, Sean, what you were reading 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, something like that, Gizmodo released another article on this that says that the total is up to 6.9 million. And getting back a little bit to what we were talking about in the last segment with Bob Ackerman, I don't know if it was, this reporter or somebody else, they were mining social media about this. And apparently some of the comments about this are like, so what? What are they going to do? Try to clone me? And they don't understand. People just don't understand the implications of privacy, and they don't understand. I don't know why they don't understand, because almost all of the people I know have fitness watches, right? So you don't think this information, no, me neither. I won't do it.
I just have no fitness.
You don't think that insurance companies are buying this data or looking for this data or trying to find any way around it? Like, this is not just like, oh, haha, they have my genetic information, this could severely impact who you are, where you go, what you do, the cost you have to pay for things. I mean, it is a very big brother type of scenario. And people are just like, oh yeah, whatever, it's just my blood type. Really? Is that all you think it is? Because like Sean said, there are myriad reasons. But one of them is outright curiosity. And people are just incredibly curious, and they will give up personal data for reasons that I don't think the three of us on this podcast understand, but give up data. And my sister has done that in search of our family members, because we did not have a lot of information from our parents and grandparents about our ancestry. And she was just genuinely curious, but she gives up a lot of information. And I can only speak for me, myself, and I, but I sure do wish you had to have some sort of sign off from family members. I sure do wish that, because now all of my information is linked to, and I don't even know the extent of what she did, but she spent about a year doing all of this research. And I can't even think of the extent of where my personal data is linked, not of my own doing. I already know that there are malicious actors out there.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that was in this report was that some of this information wasn't even just like PII stuff. It was like genetic markers for predisposition to type 1 diabetes. And there's an old sci-fi story, and I'm sorry, I apologize, the author, I cannot remember the name right now, or the author's name, but they were talking, the story was about these people sort of in the future, and they were being impacted by decisions that had been made by their ancestors that affected them genetically. Like, oh, did your ancestor smoke cigarettes? Oh, that's affecting your predisposition toward this or that. And they, you know, and I could certainly see insurance companies either straight up front or, you know, maybe a little under the table saying we can sway our algorithms with this information because, you know, if they say, well, look at this person, they have a huge predisposition towards type 1 diabetes and all they're going to be much more expensive than this person over here. And, you know, when you go to get a policy, it's going to be like those strange things on your credit history where you're going, wait, I don't think this is me. And they're like, well, sorry, you'll have to get that removed somehow.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And if you're not, you know, if you mark down, hey, I do not have this genetic predisposition, you know, let's say for me and my family, I have no history of breast cancer in my family. What if they go back 3-4 generations that I didn't know about? Mm-hmm. And then it's on my record, or if it's there erroneously. I don't think somebody's going to target me. I'm not important enough. But there are people who will be targeted by this.
Yeah.
And people will want to mess with data just to mess with data, or it will just get mixed up because I don't think that attackers are super duper careful with the integrity of data all the time. And just like you said, Doug, what happens if something lands on your health report that's either gained lawfully because now it becomes another moneymaker for data brokers, or unlawfully because sometimes insurance companies aren't always on the up and up about these things.
And of course, marketers want this data too. You know, if they look at mine and go, oh, you have a predisposition towards alcohol, you know, and it's like, oh, guess what? I get a lot of ads now for Irish whiskey. But I mean, just that kind of stuff is scary too, because there's just so much there that, and like you say, we can't control it. And you know, if my brother puts all this stuff in there, he's actually affecting me very much, or my father, or you know, or even my kid. And I think everybody should maybe, and I mean, the first time I saw this, I immediately thought this is going to get breached. This is going to get breached. This is going to get, because these companies were kind of considered like funsy kind of things. They weren't serious when they first got going. And it was like, oh, you know, benefits your ancestry search. And yeah, I'm very scared of this stuff really bad. And but I think it's going to get worse. I think you're going to get more of this as we go along.
Well, and the thing is that in the U.S., we just don't care.
I know. We don't have that law. Sean, did you have something?
Yeah, from the beginning, the co-founders said that the long game here is not to make money selling kits, though the kits are essentially get the base level data. And then they said, once you have the data, the company does actually become the Google of personalized healthcare. And so 5 years ago, they started a $300 million deal with Glaxo. This 23andMe had a $300 million deal with GlaxoSmithKline. And I found an announcement from October 30th this year, so just a couple months ago, where they've extended this collaboration. So this data is getting shared. That's one concern. Their concern now is this data is available. I mean, the old saying that we've had that we certainly know is that nothing gets deleted off the internet. Once it's out there, it's gone. Like regardless of what Snap says that things disappear, it's on a server, it gets backed up. Someone could have access to that. That DNA data, raw genetic data, is somewhere in a database in 23andMe's servers and setup. And apparently in this situation, the person whose account that was had access to that at some level. Apparently now they don't. They've turned that off. But compromise of account results in compromise of a lot. I mean, we've been talking about passwords, password protection, using different passwords. But your average Joe and Jane user, they don't know this. They don't care. They're like, what's the big deal? It's my ancestry data. They don't understand the implications and the unintended consequences around this is where I think the biggest impact is. It was 14,000 users, but that expanded because of these capabilities that 23andMe put in there where they're like, right. Oh, well, there's all these capabilities where you can find these other people and people can submit and donate and add to this. And, out of 14 million customers, 14,000 were affected by this initial breach, which should have been contained just to those users. But then when you talk about the extended consequence of this goes up to, as you said, nearly 7 million people, which is about half of the people in 23andMe. And then the extended consequences beyond that, it's just mind-boggling what the implications are with this. And I don't think anyone's going to fully understand them for months. I think next year we're probably going to have someone do an incredibly long Medium article that's like, here's what actually happened, here's what the problem is, and this is why everyone's affected, not just the people that put their stuff in 23andMe.
Well, the bad news about this is I don't think any of us are going to be able to avoid this for very long. I mean, maybe not through 23andMe, but I know, so much medical treatment now. I mean, the minute you're diagnosed with anything, they want to do genetic analysis so they can build custom drugs, and there's really positives with it. Mm-hmm. But I think that this is going to end up being another piece of PII that's probably just going to get out there on just about everybody eventually. So it's terrifying, but I'm not sure what to do about it either.
Yeah, I have a relative who seems very excited about being able to submit some genetic information and figure out what kind of medication would be most effective for you. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm okay with the old approach, which is, hey, the doctor goes, these are the different medications that we could try. Let's try this, and we'll try it at 5 milligrams. We'll try that at 10 milligrams. We'll try it at 20 milligrams and see how it is, because everyone's a little bit different. Like, I'm kind of okay with that instead of.
But I mean, it does work. I know several people who've had therapy that was gene therapy for cancers and things, and it was much more effective than they'd tried everything, and they were like, look, we got to do this genetic sequencing, and then we're going to build a drug just for you. Katie,
I think life or death situation is a little bit different. Sure,
Katie.
There's a major difference. You are opting in for
Absolutely.
that. You are opting in, and you are making a risk-based decision, which is what cybersecurity should be about anyway. But that's a risk-based decision based on specific data about a specific person. This isn't just like, hey, here, have my crap. It's not the same thing. No. And what we haven't talked about is, crimes. If you commit a crime or if there's a suspected criminal, the government can ask for records from companies like 23andMe to figure out what's going on. Let's say, in theory, my sister who did this testing was a suspected criminal, and I know nothing about it. But now the government can go and legally surveil me.
Yep.
And my parents and
there's several cases like that now where they've identified people in criminal actions that were not because they had put their information in, but because somebody, and I think there's cases going through the system right now about, is this admissible or is this not admissible because of how you obtained it.
Exactly. And just because I'm genetically related to you doesn't mean, A, I know about this crime, and B, I deserve to be surveilled.
I agree. All right. Well, that's a scary one.
Yeah. And then the other point is that at least with a healthcare practitioner, there's certain regulations they have to follow, HIPAA, et cetera. whereas a third-party company like 23andMe, whatever.
Right. I mean, HIPAA doesn't. I don't think HIPAA
PCI.
applies to these guys, and so they're, this is just a hobby kind of thing, and they don't. It's not treated as the same kind of thing as medical information. So very, very dangerous stuff out there. I did talk about this story in the first segment, but we didn't really talk about it very much. But in the last few weeks, WeWork, Olive AI, Convoy, and Vive, which are 4 startups that were valued at around $13.5 billion total, with $11 billion of that being in WeWork, all filed for bankruptcy or just plain shut down. Now, most of these were gig companies, so they were very heavily dependent on the pandemic, because that's kind of where they took off. But I mean, and this happens, and it's a normal part of life in the startup world. But this has been a pretty bad year for startups in general. I mean, are we starting to get to the shakeout point? And we did talk about this some earlier, but the shakeout point in a lot of this tech startup, gig startup, cyber startup stuff. Are we going to continue to see this sort of escalation of failed companies in this heavy capitalized area?
Well, I think some shakeup was necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have a situation where every company is successful, every company that goes out to get money gets money because they have some unique approach. I mean, I think I don't want to say the age of a snake oil AI is dead, but before ChatGPT really hit the scene, everyone was like, oh yeah, we use AI, and the money was just flowing to them. Once ChatGPT hit the scene, it was like, okay, what are you doing with AI? Are you doing it like this?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we're doing it like this. Then it's like, how are you doing it like that? So I think there's been a little more scrutiny around that. The money tightening up has been awful for a lot of companies and a lot of people, especially with inflation and everything, and layoffs, which is horrible. The thing that I think is helpful for this tightening of money to startups is that there's should be some more due diligence around it. I mean, we've seen this growth at any cost where revenue doesn't really matter. I mean, Airbnb, WeWork, Uber, Lyft, Snap, there's tons of companies out there that were just showing growth, had no real revenue. I mean, Uber's burning, what, $1 billion a year or $1 billion a quarter? It's insane, the amount of money that's burning through it, not making any money, but money keeps flowing into it. And at some point, that has to stop, whether investors are like, hey, you know what, we're going to cut our losses, or they just go, you know what, we need to see actual growth of several different things here, not just growth overall.
Well, that's a lot of hoopla stuff too. I mean, I worked for a company back in the late 90s, just, as a consultant, and, they had so much money, it was beyond comprehension, but they had no customers and they had no product. And the first time I went down there, they were like, can you help us with this, this programming stuff? And I'm like, who are your customers? Because it's a question I would always ask on any job. And they were like, oh, we don't have any yet, but we hope to have some real soon, and their burn rate was crazy. They were burning like $1 million a week. They sent me to London, just for a possible meeting, first class. I walked into the airport in Denver and bought a first class ticket to London on British Airways. And, the ticket cost like $16,000. And I was like, I called the guy. I was like, you sure you want me to do this? This is $16,000. He's like, yeah, that's no big deal at all. I spent $25 last week. And that kind of stuff. Katie, I mean, you want to chime in on this too? I mean, I think there's a big deal here.
I think there is a big deal, and I think the funding has been a little bit up and down, mostly down, and we're starting to see a little more of a shakeout in the market, like you said. But just the other day, we saw OpenView Venture Partners. I know it's only one firm, but usually when a domino collapses, others do as well. And so for those of you who haven't heard yet, OpenView Venture Partners, which is based in Boston, suspended investing because of some insider badness that was going on. So earlier this year, so less than a year ago, they raised something like $570 million. And now they're halting all investments.
Some of that was ethics too, though. There was a bunch of mention in these stories that not all these companies declared bankruptcy. A lot of them were giving the money back to investors and saying, this isn't going anywhere. We're done. I feel bad. We're going to give you some of your money back. So I think there's some of that, which is, boy, I've never seen that before. I was like, really?
It's really crazy because this is not a small player in the space. And they laid off a good portion of their workforce, and now they're suspending funding. So companies who are maybe in talks or maybe even in the final throes of getting some of that funding, it's gone. Like it doesn't exist. And again, this is just one firm. This is just one scenario. But we saw it happen a couple of months back with oh God, I know the acronym. I think the Silicon Valley Bank. There's just, even the funding sources are becoming unreliable and unpredictable. And I think, this confluence of events with less money being out there, lower valuations. I think the lower valuations and the money that's going into startups is a better thing than it was 2-3 years ago. That hyper growth is not sustainable. But I think just when we started to see an upswing, we're going to start to see a little extra caution on all sides of the market because of stuff like this that keeps coming out.
That's pretty much the historical approach to all this stuff. When new fields come into existence, like I said, tech stuff back in the 90s was just crazy. All you had to do was grab two people, get a garage somewhere, and say, hey, we might have a programming product out in 6 weeks that's going to revolutionize the internet. And, I was amazed. These guys were, they get $50 million, you get $100 million. And I was like, why did they give you this money? And then you saw this giant shakeout and all these companies failed and all this stock was worthless. Because I remember I had these two students and they called me and the guy said, guess what I'm worth today? And I was like, I don't know. What are you worth today? And he was like, I'm worth $1 million. I graduated from school 4 months ago. And I was like, how are you worth $1 million? And he was like, I got paid in shares and they're worth $1 million. And I was like, sell them. And he was like, well, yeah, I can't sell them for 1 year. And I was like, well, call me in a year and tell me you're worth $1 million. And he called me back about 9 months. And he said, guess how much I'm worth now? And I was like, 0. And he was like, there you go. Because that company had no product. They had no customers. They were just basically generating IPO revenue pre-IPO revenue where people are trying to get on board. So yeah, I think there's interesting times coming in the cyberspace. If you missed the first segment, go back and listen to some of the stuff Bob said, because I think one of the most important things that Bob said about all this was be careful when you look at companies that don't have expertise, that deep expertise is what he said. So when you see two guys 19 years old, not that they can't succeed, keep trying, everybody, because some people have done it. But when you're investing and you're seeing companies that don't have a very deep bench and they don't really know the space and they just maybe got a vague idea, you might, unless you got money to lose, I might hang on to it because that's pretty scary stuff. We saw, speaking of some of this kind of stuff, we saw Broadcom gobbling up VMware, which I hate acquisition. I love it and I hate it. I love it from a financial perspective because I love it when I bought some shares and they get bought and they get bought again. And I'm like, wow, I wonder what that translates to. But I also hate it when I have companies I deal with and I say, oh no, they got bought by them. And, and it just, I'm not going to name any companies, but I could name some. But, anytime you get acquired, especially when it's not startup acquisition, it's actually like big major player acquisitions, it's always going to be challenging. And this story was about Carbon Black, which of course we all are pretty familiar with. But so in this acquisition, Carbon Black got split off. Now, they did not get divested. They got split off, and they're going to be an independent business unit per Broadcom's announcement. And if you aren't familiar, Carbon Black is a cloud-based endpoint solution, which you're probably familiar with. But VM bought them in 2019 for $2.1 billion. But it was now spun off as a standalone business unit as a part of the $69 billion acquisition of VMware last month by Broadcom. And so Broadcom will still own it. And Hock Tan, who is the CEO of Broadcom, said last week that Broadcom was going to be looking to trim underperforming businesses at an event and specifically mentioned Carbon Black cloud security business. So I don't know. What do you think?
Just looking up the news on this, it's all about layoffs, cutting jobs. Yeah. Again, just not the, happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah, it's been a bad December so far. I know several people who have already, called and said, do you know any positions? And I'm like, probably not till next year or so. Yeah.
I mean,
happy holidays.
It's also tough for so many companies, most large companies, if not all of them, are using VMware for their virtual infrastructure. And even in Azure and AWS, you can have VMware as your virtual host there. So there's a huge amount of companies that are leveraging VMware for that. Unfortunately, VMware is getting passed around, and those customers are going to have more and more issues with support because that side of things will be de-emphasized most likely, as the security side is overly emphasized, and which is a shame because these licenses, these enterprise licenses are out there. They continue to get renewed until customers lose confidence in the platform and they decide to go full Azure or AWS and go, you know what, we'll just move away from VMware because we don't trust it anymore. And then we will see potentially one of the industry behemoths just fall over, which is a real shame. Which I think is very interesting that Carbon Black and VMware were effectively the same company, given how many security issues there are in most VMware environments. I mean, my company Trimark does VMware assessments, and everyone that we see has security issues. And this goes back many years, and ransomware has been targeting it. So cutting the security people at VMware seems like a very bad, short-sighted
I think that was my big takeaway was splitting off this, and then not only splitting it off, but starting to stress, de-emphasizing it, and when I see trimming, it's just that always. I mean, I've worked on these acquisition things before and been the bad guy and came in and said, yeah, we're gonna have to get rid of this whole unit or whatever. Sorry, everybody. I wish if the upper management had the nerve to come down here and tell you, they would, but they hired me instead. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's very poignant what you said, Sean, about you're splitting off something that seems like it really should be an integral part of VMware at this point, and instead now, and it could be fine. I mean, it may just be, we're drawing the org chart differently, and I've worked for those companies too, where every 6 months they come up with a completely different org chart. Everybody's title changes, but nothing ever really changes, really. But I've also seen it go the other way. And it's like, oh, that unit over there, now that we've separated them out, they're a service organization. They don't generate revenue. That's it for them then. And we're going to cut their budgets by 76% in order to support this other entity that we think has more potential. Katie, did you have something on that one?
No, nothing.
Okay. I thought you were waving at me. I'm sorry.
My big concern with that.
Oh, is it a dog or a cat? I have both. Oh, I thought I saw the cat. Yeah, earlier. Yeah, I'm in the studio, so I don't have my cat, or she would already be up here, like, whacking the microphone. My students get used to that because there's almost always like a cat tail. It's like, one time somebody was like, "Does your microphone move or something?" And I was like, "No, that's my cat's tail. It's just, it just looks like I have a black beard that's possessed by something." So yeah, it's just because she literally will get right there.
My big concern is really around what Broadcom's going to look at in the future. Just like when we were talking to Bob in the last segment, there are certain areas that are interesting for investment, interesting for growth. Infrastructure is always going to be there. There's going to be a need for servers. There's going to be need to host things off of physical devices and systems such as cloud, the IaaS, the cloud data center approach. So the VMware is important. VMware should continue to operate the way that it has. And they also have other elements as part of that as well, like the Horizon connectivity component for remote access. They have VDI capabilities. There's a lot there beyond just, okay, the server's hosted on this virtual platform. The challenge that I see is that Broadcom may look, and they may not, they may look and go, okay, what are the things that are important right now in the industry that will continue to get investment and focus? AI, cloud security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How does VMware as a hosting or a virtual infrastructure hosting platform play into that? And if they don't see the value, if they don't see the revenue, then they'll either axe it or try to pawn it off on some other company.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if VMware is so prevalent that it's going to turn into one of those, we don't want to see any more of these stories about compromise, so we've got to put some money back over there, or they just end up spinning it off and selling it to get rid of it because of the liability. I don't know. I was sad to see it. We use VMware in my program at school. We have like an academic license for all this stuff, and I've already seen changes since Broadcom took over. And they weren't positive to me. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
I've heard the same thing from others.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't really know much about Broadcom, but I just, whenever I see these kind of acquisitions, I go, yeah, things are going to change. There's no way this is going to remain the way it was. So,
Right. And Microsoft has exited the virtual infrastructure space for the most part with Hyper-V. They've de-emphasized Hyper-V over the past 5 years. They're just like, okay, VMware kind of won this. We're good. We got this Azure thing over here.
Of course, the cloud thing's driving some of that too, because those bare metal. I mean, I have 3 bare metal hypervisors that I'm still running, but each time as the hardware starts to come to its end of life, I'm actually going, maybe now's the time. I mean, I'm still facing the problem of dealing with how do you account for and fund cloud-based stuff versus traditional stuff, because traditionally when I want to set up a bare metal hypervisor, I went to capital projects and I get money allocated for server and license, and they put it in and they depreciate it over 5 years. But when I went to them with the cloud-based stuff, the accounting people were like, you want to do what? That's not capital. And it's like, well, can I take the money I was going to get for capital and put it over here so I can pay my monthly fees to Azure? And they were like, no, you cannot. That's illegal. You can't move money out of that pot and put it in this pot, not in a not-for-profit. This is a big problem. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, and I think there's going to continue to be a lot of stuff going on in that cloud space versus on-prem stuff and all that. I mean, and I love my hardware. I mean, I'm going to cry when I no longer, like I just got told that, all my stuff is moving into a cloud-based router, a cloud-based firewalls. I'm like, but then I won't be able to touch my ASAs. And I mean, I have all my stuff and I get to work on it. And it's like, no, it's like going from owning a Ferrari to riding in a cab. It sucks, but that's life. That was for you, Adrian. Going from the Alfa Romeo supercar to riding in a 1988 Toyota Camry on an Italian Uber. So you keep that in mind. Well, speaking of Europe,
didn't you send a picture earlier of him like touring an Alfa Romeo factory?
Yeah, I think so. I think he was looking at that. That was either that or he was like, hanging out with Valtteri Bottas or something. I'm not sure, but sorry, F1 joke. Speaking of Europe, the European Space Agency is now. When I first read this, I thought this is so weird, but then it was like it made perfect sense to me. They're exploring cybersecurity for the space industry. Now, to me, again, I'm old, so space industry is like 3 guys in a tin can circling the Earth, hoping they don't die. And I mean, obviously, I don't really believe that, but that's just sort of ingrained. And now I will say, I think the space station that ESA puts up would have a lot better food. I mean, the U.S. astronauts were like, they were giving them like a box full of Tang. If you don't know what Tang is, it's like a powdered orange drink that tastes like.
That was good stuff.
It tastes like tears and sadness with, but you can't make bar drinks out of it for college bars. And maybe, so maybe like a case of Tang and Slim Jims that like get you to the moon and back. I mean, or Taco Bell.
Tang is just a bad Kool-Aid that makes kids sad. Yeah, I agree with you there.
That stuff was so nasty.
I loved Tang as a kid. It was actually tangy, but
I feel bad for you. I feel bad for you, Katie.
It is. No, it's one of those things. I've known people that would like kill for Tang. They're like, this is my favorite thing. And other people that were like, this is so disgusting.
As they have their candy cigarette in their mouth, talking about in a French accent about the horrors that is life.
I have had candy cigarettes before. My grandfather used to get them for us. But then he would also give you real cigarettes. So
there's that. I mean, between the candy cigarettes and the Big League Chew, which is the bubble gum that's supposed to simulate chewing tobacco.
Lovely.
Nasty. That was great. We were getting off topic though. No, I like the transition over to European Space Agency. This is something we've talked about a few times. There's a couple of companies out there that have started to focus on cybersecurity in space. I think it makes sense from the perspective that there's some unique challenges with space exploration, space communication. There at DEF CON, there's a satellite communications village, where basically you're looking at how do satellites communicate, what are the weaknesses in those protocols. Given that anyone with a dish can kind of try to communicate with a satellite, there are concerns there. And then we've kind of extended IP to, IPv4 or v6 to space as well. It should be something that's looked at. It should be something that should be considered as we have more and more space junk out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're that far away from having, people that are, I mean, we already do have people that are on space stations floating around up there, and pretty soon they're wanting to send people to Mars and all these things. And so there will be continual communications, not to mention the near space stuff. So Starlinks and all this kind of stuff and all those things as well are going to be there. Katie, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, a little while back, I wrote an article about this. It was when my company was still sort of sponsoring my newsletter. And my PR person said, go write about this. And I'm like, I don't even know what this is. So I spent a few days looking at it and researching it. And there's a lot more than you think going on there. And this is the IT/OT issue as well, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just, hey, there's space stuff. It's that there's space stuff communicating with ground station stuff and ground communication stuff communicating with like VMware, and so it is a, in air quotes, supply chain issue as well. And it's not like this stuff is hugely hard to attack. Like there was a demonstration on it not like 10 years ago, I think, at Black Hat. I can't remember now because since I mentioned Tang, I am old and my memory isn't as good as it used to be. But there have been demonstrations about how it's just not that hard to attack these systems. And I mean, imagine, I know this is a little conspiracy theorist and over dramatization, but let's say somebody really did want to mess with an entire country's communication system and cause an emergency alert on something massive.
Well, I mean, the GPS satellites were one of the first places we saw people talking about hacks in space because, there was the idea that if somebody could even just, a tiny manipulation of GPS in some way could cause massive, and all this stuff was designed ages ago. It was, it was proprietary. And I think that IT/OT mention is the best analogy for this because we saw the same thing go on in OT where forever and ever and ever companies, because believe me, I've faced this so many times where I'm going, this is dangerous. And they're like, even if somebody could figure out how to get to it, it's too weird. Nobody would ever figure this out. Right. And I'm like, no, exactly. Some 12-year-old kid will figure it out, and they'll sit there and spend days and days and days and they will figure it out. And they're like, they couldn't get to it anyway. And I'm like, really? It's so strange because I can actually see a Wi-Fi node that's sitting in your warehouse right now. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, it's called Chuck's office and it's connected to the network and I'm pinging your, one of your devices. And they're like, well, that's weird. And then you go down there and go, Chuck, do you have a Wi-Fi node in your office that's connected to the OT network? And like, oh yeah, I put that up so I could go to board meeting and keep an eye on the nuclear reactor. And I'm like, really? And I can reach that from the parking lot. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, just like those mobile radios that were or the radio handsets that were being used in Europe for a large number of companies, law enforcement, which was using a proprietary encryption stack, which wasn't very good, and people figured out how to break into it. These things will get figured out. I was gonna say that with GPS, at least we have 20 different GPS systems now.
Yeah. I mean that was just
slight joke. The U.S. we've got Galileo. China has one.
I didn't want to start a thing with that, but that was an initial. I got asked by a news network to talk about that long ago, where they were saying, "Is this possible?" And it was like, "Well, anything's possible." And they were like, "Are these satellites safe? Could somebody target them?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I don't like to start stuff, but yeah. But they did say ESA said they're setting up something called the CSOC, which is like a space-based SOC. That's going to be used to manage all their missions and all this stuff. So, I was like, I guess it's really just a SOC, but is it a SOC in space? Or is it just, I was like,
you just wanted to say a SOC in space.
Yeah. And I'm hoping.
Pigs in space.
And I want to get beamed up to it because wouldn't that be cool? And maybe we can all get jobs in 0G or something like that. Although I always feel I've never gotten motion sickness ever. And on no matter what, in airplanes or little airplanes, stunt planes, you name it, did all that stuff, never got motion sickness. But I was like, that'll be me. One day somebody's going to say, hey, would you like to come up to the space station and do a little work for us? And I'm going to be like, yes. And then, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm that person that got, violently ill for the rest of my life and had to come back to ground. So I don't know. But yeah, all that stuff's pretty scary. And there's also the thing about how much of that stuff's running on old platforms. Are there things up there that are running on Windows NT 4.0 and stuff like that, or worse? They're running on DOS or something because they can't patch it because there's just no way to do it. It was built in there and it's just sitting up there. And now, oh yeah, we put an antenna on it, and So, yeah.
You'll find out they're running Vista somewhere.
Yeah, and all kinds. I mean, I'm sure they are. I'm sure there's satellites up there running everything you've ever heard of, probably going back to the dawn of history. And so and then like OT. I mean, I don't even know how many times you looked at OT stuff, and I'm going, wow, is that DOS? And the guy's like, I think it's DOS 3.6. We can't upgrade it. It's not possible. Everything quits. And I'm like, yeah, you want to be sure and protect that, okay? And they're like, oh, we just connected to the internet. And I'm like, oh, great move.
It's okay. I'm sure most of the satellites are running Linux. It'll be fine.
I'm sure.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that never causes a problem. But, all right. Well, the next one, this story was posted by somebody in response to a LinkedIn post. And I did like this story because I've seen this a lot. It was a LinkedIn post about not blaming employees when their mistakes result in cybersecurity issues. And I thought it was a very interesting story. And it's one of those things that's always been an issue. When I was auditing and doing pen tests, everybody was terrified. We would walk in and people are running for the exits because they're so scared that you're going to find something and you're going to say, this wasn't done. And then upper management's going to step in and say, you're fired. That's how we fix it. We fired Chet. If you'd done a better job, Chet, we wouldn't be in this horrible situation. And they go make a big press release. And then they actually make it worse. Because I really saw this once. They fired like 3 people. And I'm like, now, who's going to do this job? And the CEO said, well, I guess you'll have to hire some people. And I'm like, who? For what you pay? I'd be lucky if I can hire high school kids. And you just fired these 3 people who are willing to work for this lousy job that you've got. And so, I think that, so the article was about not doing that. That maybe we could do something different than that, which I have seen happening. When I tether my dirigible to the mast on the Woolworth building, and old Gil doesn't tie the knots properly, I have them fired out of a cannon to the Hudson or something. But in this new view, I say, but shouldn't we look better at why they didn't tie the knots correctly and maybe give them a little bit more training and see if they're really incompetent, or is this, and what the article said was, is this a symptom of deeper trouble in the system and workplace? And I would say, yes, it absolutely is.
The scapegoating approach is old school mentality. You fire the one that made the mistake instead of the perspective that everyone makes a mistake. Even the best admin out there has made a mistake and deleted something they shouldn't have. And that's when you test out your recovery process. I think the other side of this is, you could have someone that's right 99 times, they're wrong once, and then you fire them, and then you end up firing your best employee or getting rid of someone who is probably the person that has kept everything running behind the scenes with duct tape and baling wire, and they're the ones that have actually kept things going and have done the work of 5 people, the one that has never taken a vacation, and now you've gotten rid of them. And yeah, you can't just hire someone to replace them. You'd have to hire like 10 people to replace them, and they still don't have that institutional knowledge. Institutional knowledge is something that I think is so important, but is forgotten about a lot of the time, that you lay people off because of financial reasons or whatever. I don't see the financial reasons when you look at the numbers that are being put out in financial reports this year from companies that have laid people off. They still are making millions, if not hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and they lay people off. There's not just a human cost to that, but there's a cost to it within the organization. You lay people off because they've been around for a while. Now you don't have the people that understand that OT network has all these variety of things and is not as simple to manage or organize like your production environment. I mean, we look at a lot of Active Directory environments, including manufacturing and OT, and you cannot compare a production Active Directory forest that has your standard mix of users and admins and workstations and applications and SQL servers and all this other stuff with an Active Directory environment in manufacturing. You cannot do it. Those are very different things. In a manufacturing environment, you don't really have workstations. You have these machines that then control robots and control other things, and in some cases are the thing that does the thing. So therefore, you cannot treat them the same way. You cannot deploy the same level of security, and you cannot just handle everything with a broad brush. And unfortunately, that sort of nuance and understanding gets lost in these sort of situations where, oh, well, so-and-so made this mistake, and because they didn't have the right firewall configuration to protect the manufacturing environment from the production environment, our manufacturing environment got breached. And so let's fire that person. Well, let's fix the problem. Let's come together. Let's come together as a team and really take this as a learning opportunity so leadership can have a better understanding of why these things are important. This is what we've been telling you about for months, if not years. And this whole CISO scapegoating approach just hasn't been working either. I mean, it's ridiculous to go, Chet is the one that caused the problem, or Jane is the one that caused the problem, or Sally or Charles or whomever is the one that caused the problem. Let's just axe them. It's ridiculous. It reminds me of the old saying, or the old joke about the CEO with 3 envelopes, and that CEO has been ousted. Has the next CEO says, "Hey, in your safe are 3 envelopes. The first time you run into trouble, open up the one labeled number 1." It's like, all right, things are good for the first year. Then there's some problems. He goes, opens up the safe, takes envelope number 1, says, "Blame your last CEO." Okay, great, not a problem. So he blames the last CEO, gets him through that. Year or 2 later, going through a really tough time, the company's struggling for profitability, goes back to the safe, opens up the second envelope. It says, "Blame the economy." Okay, great. So he does that, continues on, and then he hits his next level of difficulty, goes and opens up the third envelope. It says, "Prepare 3 envelopes." Yeah. It's just the same thing over and over again. And unfortunately, we cannot keep operating like this. First of all, as a broader community and a country, but also as an industry that just continues to go, well, the CISO is the problem, let's get rid of them. How about we frame a little bit better about how we can enable security in these environments? More of the proactive stuff, I think, is important. As Bob was saying in the last segment, he said we're getting to the point where attacks are quicker. I mean, we've already seen it. He's talking about AI shortening attacks and what can be done in that. We are already seeing that. We're already seeing how quick attackers can operate. The problem is we look less at proactive things and more at, like, what is the detection around finding an attacker and stopping them? We need to be better at proactively fixing these things before the attacker finds them. And we should be doing this. I mean, the stuff that we see in security assessments and Active Directory and Azure AD and VMware and what have you are things that have been around for years. The problem is that organizations are not better resourced to be able to look at these things, to identify them, because they're fighting fires or keeping the systems up. Security is being pulled 13 different ways to focus on patching and focus on this and focus on cloud, and now it's AI. It's insane the pace that people have to operate at. And then when they miss one little thing, you know what? Maybe you should just go somewhere else.
Yeah, and then it collapses too, and you end up. I took over one where the whole networking staff had resigned because 2 people were fired because of a breach problem. And then, then all their work fell on these other 3 people, and the CEO's going, work smarter, not harder. And, all these adages that didn't help matters at all. And then the other 3 people they had quit because they could get better jobs. And, they call me and say, "Can you come in and help manage this network?" And I'm like, "We're going to need some people for this. You got, a lot of customers here." Did you have anything on that one, Katie?
Yeah, so the article itself wasn't specific to cybersecurity,
No,
and it wasn't
not
specific to either security staff versus employees. And I think I thought it was a great article, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know why I said actually. I thought it was a great article, period. And you can look at it 2 ways.
Grammar
and Sean
Security
had
Weekly.
one very astute perspective of it, not blaming the security staff when things go wrong, because, I mean, this is inherent in our lives. But I think it's also applicable for us to non-security employees as well. And we also have to look at that aspect of it, because that hasn't served us well, right? Yes. Having an antagonistic approach to users, having an antagonistic approach to anything doesn't serve us well. I was having a conversation earlier in the day with somebody about somebody else who tends to jump to, that person is stupid, I'm going to let them know what I think. And this is the 100th time I've had this conversation about this particular person. No joke, 100th time, probably, no exaggeration, maybe even more. And there's not much more to say about this person. So my response back, and this was just over messaging, my response back was, yeah, calling people stupid definitely gets you invited over for tea. Works every time. And like, if you want people, it doesn't matter which side you're on, the employee side or the, security admin side, treating anybody antagonistically isn't going to help the cause. I don't think we have a security awareness problem. I just really don't. We have a security habit problem, but that is also part of a business execution problem. There is no employee in this world who at no time has to open an attachment or click on a link. Like, I've done it a million times today. It's part of my job. And if we're using AI, right? If we're an attacker and we're using AI, those attachments and links become less like the king of Jordan wants you to click on this link, right? So we can't keep blaming anybody, really. We just have to focus on problems, because you're wasting time, you're wasting energy, and you're not ever. It's like the whole debate about healthcare too. Like, whose responsibility is it for your healthcare? Is it your doctor's? No, they give you advice. They tell you what to do. But if you sit there and eat ho-hos, drink beer, and never get on the treadmill, that's on you, man. Like,
hey,
that's just a Friday night. I mean,
well, yeah, I was gonna say, like, okay, I don't feel bad now.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
When's the last time you had a ho-ho though?
No, I don't like those.
Okay.
No, real cupcakes are nothing. So yeah, I mean, the whole issue with scapegoating, and I agree with you. The article is absolutely on point. Is there's a psychological aspect to scapegoating. If it's obvious that you're going to fire people that make mistakes, then people are not going to make mistakes. They're not going to try to make things better, which relate directly to security. One of the things you can do in an environment as an admin, as a security person, is improve the level of security by breaking things. You're going to break things by trying to improve security in an environment. It's natural. Yes, there's a lot of things you can do that won't break anything. But a lot of times, yes, you're going to break a workflow, you're going to break something's going to go offline temporarily. It's going to happen. If you have a culture of scapegoating, going anyone that makes mistakes or takes something down is going to be fired, then there's a problem there. And then the other side of that, which is the psychological part, is if you know that whoever made a mistake is going to be scapegoated and potentially fired, why would you ever own up to a mistake or even say, yes, that was me? And now you end up in a situation where multiple people, I don't mean to
interrupt you, but if you know this is happening, Sean, are you going to join that company if you're looking for a job?
No, but how I wouldn't necessarily know that, right? That's the other thing. You can go in blind to a situation like that, and then you start to learn what the culture is like. And yeah, at some point you're going to leave, but in an economic situation like this, where maybe jobs aren't available, you're kind of stuck there. But nobody's going to own up to a mistake in a situation like that or a culture like that, where they think there's a chance of being fired or having some sort of major punishment or retribution, or some sort of being put on a list where you're not going to be promoted anymore.
Yeah, I mean, in audits, we saw that. I mean, we saw it where it already happened. We saw it would happen after audits, and it is when you treat your employees like that, you end up with people that can't change jobs, which you end up with the worst of the worst. You end up with people that are terrified to even report because they know if they report it, somebody's going to get blamed. And we saw that over and over again. I'm like, nobody wrote this up in the annual report. Like, you're supposed to be reporting this. And they're like, if we, the last person who did that got fired, the CEO came in the next day and they were gone. And so we just don't report it. We just say all is well. That's just the best thing to do, because otherwise, and I'm like, yeah, you say that until you have these problems, and then you're in court being deposed and they're going, why didn't you fix this? So I really think it's a good article that's worth a read by almost everybody, because it doesn't just apply to cyber. I will warn you that cyber is a small world. Lots of us know each other. I get people calling me all the time saying, I was thinking about taking a job over here at X. What do you think? Have you ever heard anything? And I'm going, I wouldn't work there if you paid me millions of dollars, because I was over there once and I know the CISO, and oh yeah, you don't want to work over there. It's a nightmare. Nobody ever stays there more than 3 or 4 weeks before they're looking for another job. And then, you're just doomed. So yeah, I think this was worth reading. We had a bunch of other fun stories, but unfortunately I talked too long about everything. And as ever, the time slipped away so fast that it was absolutely shocking. I do want to thank Katie and Sean for being on my inaugural show at ESW, where they'll probably never have me on again. But well,
thank you for joining us.
Thanks to Adrian for letting me run the show for a change. It's a great show. I hope you keep watching. We do miss you, Adrian, because I'm sure you'll do a better job when you come back. Thanks to all of you that watched and listened to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly, and engage.